Okay, this tutorial is to turn what you've already learnt in terraining and setting up the basic rigid body FPS controller from the standard assets into actually a fully functioning FPS type game. Basically set this up like a tank type game that obviously fires beach balls because that's fun. So at the moment I've also mapped this to an Xbox controller, so I can either space jumps, control fires, keys move, the mouse moves the viewport, click on a mouse also fires, or I can pick up my Xbox controller and I can now move around the scene, I can look around, I can fire, and I can jump. So let's look at how this all happens. In the hierarchy, I've made a nice, clean, simple hierarchy. I have my terrain, which you already know how to do. This is a rigid body control, FPS control that's dropped straight in. There's no edits made to it. And then my game loop is sort of, I've called it a game loop, but at this stage it's not a game loop, but it will be in the future. That's where everything is. But attached to the main camera here, let's look in the scene, we see we've got the cylinder here. Because it's attached to the camera, it'll move with the camera. And then the spawn point is the point at which the beach ball spawns, at the very end of the cylinder. And the other thing I've done is terrain has the tag called terrain. And you'll see why in a moment. Let's look at the beach ball. So it's just a simple sphere with a beach ball wrap texture put around it. Just a simple line texture, nothing complex. Let's look at it in the code. So let me just bring up the code. So it's really simple. It has two on-trigger enters. You'll recognize this from what you did with rollerball. If it collides with the terrain, which I gave the tag to the terrain, it sets active false, it disappears. If it collides with an enemy, which we'll build later, again, you do your collectible, like in rollerball. It disables the other one and this object, and you'd obviously increment your score, update your UI, use everything you've learnt from rollerball to do that. So it's nice and easy. Then let's look at the game loop, because this is where most of the magic happens. As I said, it's not a lot of magic, it's quite simple. We are going to basically do a request of get access from fire 1. I'll explain that in a second. If that happens to be greater than 0, or get button down fire 1. I'll explain why 1's button down and 1's why get access in a second. We're going to run this method here, which is spawn ball. And all we're basically doing is we've created a rigid body that we've allocated here through the ball object. We are then instantiating, that's a fancy word for creating, a new object that is at these three vectors. It's going to get the vector, the location, the X location of the spawn point, the Y location of the spawn point, and the Z location of the spawn point, and the rotation of the spawn point. And so what it's going to do is instantiate or create a ball object, which is our beach ball, as a rigid body. This is all in GitHub, so you'll be able to go through it and actually look at it, download it, and clone the repository and have a look in more detail. And then once we've cloned it, we need to add a force. So we're simply rigid body B, which is what we create. Each time we do this, we create. We're going to add a force to them to transform forward, multiplied by the ball speed. So let's look at that again in the editor. So under the game loop, I've got this here. So I've got my ball speed. I've dragged in my prefab. So I dragged into the sample scene, I grabbed a sphere, I did a wrap, I added the script, and then I dragged it into here, and then the spawn point is this spawn point under the bottom here. Okay, and that when we press it, it's listening for fire 1, and when I click fire 1 with I've mapped fire 1 to the right axis of my key controls, my left trigger, my left mouse click, and the left control. They all do fire 1. Okay, and I'm going to show you where I do that now. And this is where you do the mapping. So I said in your code, you're only making a request. You're saying if fire 1, you're saying go get that, find out the information and what's that reading right now. And if it happens to be greater than 0, then it's going to do spawn ball. So let's look at the mappings. So we go edit. Now the first time you do this, it's edit project settings. The first time it is, this will look a little bit different, and I've actually created extra ones. You actually can't create more than on the list here, but you can reallocate. So I can go say, right, this fire 3, I actually now want that to be another fire 1. And that becomes fire 1, and I can then map fire 1 to many, many things. So what I did was I mapped fire 1 is mapped to, it's a mouse or a button, and I've mapped it to mouse 0, which is my left mouse key, and left control. So in my code, I said input, get button down, have those buttons been pressed, and it wouldn't matter whether it's the left control button or the left mouse button, that will return a true because it's a Boolean value, so it'll return true, which will make, because this is an OR, so either that or that will run spawn ball. But I've also added, under fire 1, I've done up the top here, I've added joystick axis, and I've said the 9th axis. And I've added another fire 1, which is joystick axis, and it's the 10th axis. And what that relates to is if we go to our documentation, so this is in the MKTR extras I've created. There's a link to this, or you can just look at this documentation here. It actually has, now notice Windows and Mac is different. We're only aiming for Windows, so we're going to keep it really, really simple. It actually tells you how to map it here. So it says what's X and Y axis, 4th and 5th axis. So it has all the different axes, and all we're doing is mapping to that in Unity. So we're saying do that. Now, when you do out of the box, you'll find that your first person controller maps nicely with the mouse. I can move my mouse and the head will move, but my Xbox controller won't move the camera's head. So what I did is I added another, and it's so the first person controller is already mapped to mouse X and Y. So all I want to do is create an additional mouse Y, an additional mouse X. So I did mouse Y, gravity is still 0. I've added a dead value of 0.15. That's because it's an axis, it's a float, and it sometimes feeds off a very, very small amount of value, and that causes the head to move around. So by saying dead, it's basically what I'm saying is anything less than 0.15, it reads as 0. You can change the sensitivity, so I actually think the sensitivity needs to be a little bit higher. It's a joystick axis. We want a joystick axis, and we want the 5th axis. And if we go to our documentation here, the 5th axis, I think I can zoom in here, happens to be, where is it showing here? The stick. The right hand is the 4th and 5th axis. Okay, so vertical and horizontal, 4th and 5th axis. So I added the 5th axis to mouse Y and mouse X. I had the 4th axis again. So all I did was I changed it. I can simply go fire 2, change that to mouse. I'm going to create another mouse X. I wanted the dead 0.15. I wanted a sensitivity of 0.2. I want a joystick axis, and I changed this, then it was the 4th axis. Okay, and get motion for object. We use this if you had 2 controllers, controlling, say, you could have 2 separate third-person controllers, rigid bodies, and you can allocate different controllers to them. So joystick 1 will be player 1, joystick 2 will be player 2. But in this case, we're only 1-player game, so it's getting it from any controller. Okay? So again, feel free to clone this and have a look at the settings and compare it to yours. The documentation's there. The link to the repo is in the video. So thank you very much.